Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Lara May, a clinical pharmacist specializing in functional medicine, as well as a certified yoga teacher and Reiki master. I run a truly integrative health coaching practice encompassing functional medicine lab testing, yoga and meditation, and a sprinkling of Reiki energy medicine. Join me here on Light Body Radio to break through your health plateau and come into alignment with your natural vitality. Hello and welcome to Light Body Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Lara May, and today I have with me Morgan Adams. She is a holistic sleep coach for women who struggle with getting a good night's sleep consistently, which I think is a big deal for so many of us out there. Her goal is to help women feel better, live better, and the key to both begins with a good night's sleep. Morgan is also a former insomniac herself who spent almost a decade using prescription sleeping pills despite knowing that her overall sleep quality suffered. She's also a two-time breast cancer survivor who advocates for a lifestyle of disease prevention and integrating holistic strategies for cancer treatment. I'm really fascinated to hear your story. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you so much, Lara. It's nice to be here.
So sort of tell us about your journey and how you came to be, a sleep specialist and, how that unfolded for you.
Yeah. So probably about 18 years ago, I was dealing with a really bad insomnia situation personally. So I was going through some relationship challenges, which I won't spill the beans on any of that. But basically what it did is it created this really anxiety-ridden situation for me where I would basically lie in bed for up to 2 hours most nights, waiting for sleep to come. And after a couple months of this, it got really old. And I decided to get in touch with my doctor about it. And I was given Ambien to take. And at the time, I was actually a pharmaceutical sales rep. So pills were part of my daily experience, marketing them. And so when I was given this prescription for Ambien, I didn't think twice about it. I was like, I trust the doctor, I trust the medication, and I'm going to take it because I don't know of any other way to deal with my sleep issues other than to take something. So the pill actually helped me get to sleep sooner. It did what it said it would do. It got me to sleep sooner. However, the next day's side effects were less than desirable, I will say. So we can talk more about that later, but took them for 8 years, dealt with the side effects. And then after that 8-year point, I met my current husband, who was then my new boyfriend. And he said something to me in a loving way, but in a very kind of like, this is the deal kind of thing. He said, it really freaks me out when you take those pills because you act like a zombie. You're not yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. Like I have to do something about getting off these pills. So I did something that I don't advise anybody out there to do. I did it myself. So what I did was I just cut the pills into smaller increments and weaned myself
did a taper.
off. I did a taper. And that's really the way to do it. But I didn't consult my doctor. So, and I also didn't have any other support. So for all of the people who are doing, maybe potentially taking sleeping pills, the really more appropriate way to do it is to consult with your prescribing provider to get a taper schedule. And then ideally hire someone like me, like a sleep coach, who can give you that support and accountability, because it's not easy for everyone. It can be really a very trying time. So fortunately, it was pretty smooth sailing for me, and I got my sleep back to, a pretty decent level, and then slept well for years. But then there was a plot twist. And that plot twist was something that we all experienced collectively back in 2020, March of 2020, when the pandemic started. Nobody knew which way was up. And I started having some sleeping issues again. And I got really concerned because I didn't want to go down that road of full-blown insomnia again. So I started getting on Google, looking up, how to sleep better. I bought an Aura ring to track my sleep. And in pretty short order, I got things normalized. But I got so interested in this whole topic of sleep and like how easy it was to get it back on track. So I started to just organically share things on Facebook about what I'd been doing. And I came to find out at that time that there were a lot of other people struggling with their sleep during this time.
Mhm.
And I had, since 2018, and during my first breast cancer diagnosis, I really felt like my mission in life was to help women with their health in some way, shape, or form. But I actually wasn't sure how that would play out. And then when I found sleep, I just thought, oh my gosh, there's so many women struggling with sleep. I've conquered my own sleep. I feel passionately about this. This is going to be my new profession. So from that point on, it was just like a flurry of study and certifications and credentialing. So I spent about a year doing all that and then started my sleep coaching practice in 2021. So it's been a little bit of a bumpy ride to get here, but that's how I got here.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you said so many different aspects, especially, I mean, we could start with the side effects of Ambien specifically. Being a pharmacist, I am familiar with them. I've heard feedback from many patients, both in my Western medicine life and my functional medicine life, as to because Ambien's just one of the many of a menagerie out there. I think a lot of people also, take Benadryl way too much to help them sleep. So anything that you're taking, even sometimes herbs, will still have those side effects of waking up groggy, actually disrupting your sleep cycle. So, like Ambien specifically can give you crazy dreams. You can even sleepwalk through it. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I can definitely speak to all that. So when I took Ambien, I did have some issues sometimes right after I took it. So I would do like binge eating episodes. There are people out there who do things that are worse than binging. There's, online shopping, there's driving, there's all sorts of things. And what happened because of all these unfortunate events is that they put a black box warning on these categories of drugs in
Mhm.
2019 because they were so potentially dangerous. Obviously the driving, very dangerous. Um, so 80% of people who are taking this class of drug do end up having next day residual side effects like grogginess, trouble getting out of bed, trouble focusing. That played out for me big time. In my day job, I was working in a position where I had to write very quickly, like a press release when something went down. And there were times when I was just frozen at the keyboard. I just could not produce the words because I really didn't feel alert and ready to function until close to lunchtime. So like almost half
Mhm.
my day was gone by the time the side effects wore off. Well, come to find out later in all of my research on these medications, back in 2013, the makers of Ambien were made to change their dosing requirement for women because what was
Mhm.
happening was women were being overdosed. So essentially, during this whole stretch of time that I was taking Ambien, I was being overdosed. So
Yeah.
that's extremely scary.
Well, and
Um,
I'll say that I'm going to interrupt you there just
Please.
because with that, so when the drug was originally approved, it was approved for 5 and a 10 milligram immediate release formulation. They now have a controlled release. But you're right, the studies originally didn't separate out those groups and study them. So after market studies, we realized that women really functioned better with a lower dose. They came out with a suggestion. I don't know how many physicians still follow that because I still see so many women on that higher dose. And the also too, I think something to keep in mind is tolerance. And this is also the case with benzodiazepines. So Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, Librium. I'm using brand names here so people might recognize them more. But it's same, like even if you start on a low dose, once you take them over a course of longer period of time, your body, develops a tolerance to that neurotransmitter stimulation, and you need more and more to get the same effect. So that's why I wanted to throw in that little caveat, because even though, yes, it is recommended that women take a lower dose, I still see, and I don't know if this is because they were on it so long, they were never adjusted in their dose, or because they've been on it so long, they've been tapered up to the
Yeah.
higher dose.
Yeah.
But still, there
Well,
is definitely a difference. Yeah. Keep
absolutely.
going.
Well,
Sorry.
I know, I'm glad you interjected with that because this is your wheelhouse. But I had a client recently who'd been on Ambien for 17 years. She's in her late 30s. So since college, she'd been on Ambien, and
It's crazy.
her dose was sort of like, I think, 5 milligrams. So
Okay.
she was, in that, I guess, normal range of, but she,
Hmm.
I feel like there are just so many people out there that are given Ambien and they're just taking it ongoing. Because if you look at the package insert, it's not designed, the pills were not designed to be long term. I believe that
No.
the verbiage in the package insert states they're to be used for 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's the same with benzodiazepines, but people
yeah,
are on them for decades.
yeah.
It's
And
once they're on them, they very rarely come off unless
yes,
with intention they want to, and they figure out a way and a support system to do that.
right. So I feel like because primary care doctors, they've only gotten about 2 hours of like sleep science training in medical school. So I understand how this all plays out because somebody comes to them with insomnia. They don't know about CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. They don't know how to administer it. They don't have the toolkit really to help a client with or a patient with insomnia. And so it's so much easier to write a prescription. And it's actually okay. I mean, in my opinion, it's okay to prescribe Ambien for a specific reason. There's a death, there's a divorce, there's a job loss, and someone needs just that crutch, for a couple weeks. But what the problem is that the physicians are not typically coming up with an exit strategy for the
Right.
patient, and they're not saying, okay, this is how long you take it, and this is how you're going to get off of it. It just becomes like a revolving door. And this is why many of my clients end up on a benzo or an Ambien for 20 years, because the
Mhm.
doctor didn't sort of like nip it in the bud in the beginning when it was supposed to have happened.
Yeah. And honestly, too, I don't really even know if they're trained on how to take people off of them.
No, I don't think they are.
I
I
mean,
don't.
as pharmacists, we are a little bit, and
Yeah.
I've taken many clients off of, like weaned them and worked with them and had them in communication with their physicians the whole time, but just, with SSRIs, benzos, Ambien, like there's many medications out there that you don't want to just stop cold turkey.
Right.
So that's why I am, impressed that, I mean, and it's probably your background in the pharmaceutical sales that you knew to taper and not just stop.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good thing.
Exactly. Yes, I did learn something in those years of selling
Um,
those drugs.
yeah. So I do want to back up a little bit and let's talk about like why so many women, especially in midlife, start to suffer with poor sleep.
Yeah. So women in midlife have it really rough with sleep. So typically you'll find about 50% ish of women in midlife struggling with their sleep. And so there's sort of like three main buckets of reasons why they are having trouble. The first one is kind of obvious. So hormones, the progesterone and the estrogen fluctuating and then declining over time. So that can really wreak havoc on our sleep. Second thing is that mental health disorders, specifically anxiety and depression, tend to be more present with women, especially in midlife. And sometimes we find that when we have anxiety and depression, we become more vulnerable to insomnia.
Hmm.
And then, sort of the last reason why women are struggling more in midlife is because at this time in our lives, our 40s and 50s, we have so many competing demands on our time. So I call us the sandwich generation, because if you look at like, maybe a 45-year-old woman, she could potentially have a child at home that she's still in charge of taking care of. She could
Mm-hmm.
also have an elderly parent who is needing care, needing rides. They could be at their end of their life, and that's can be time consuming to take care of them at that stage. And then on top of all that, she could potentially be at the top of her career game as a manager or as a business leader. So with all of those competing demands, you can imagine the stress and anxiety level can really reach a pretty high level at that time in their
Yeah.
lives. So all of these different multi-layer, multifaceted reasons can kind of pile up on each other, and we end up with just a really unfortunate situation with sleep disruption.
Yeah. And or I will also add on to that, like dealing and or trying to cope with your own diagnoses, which you sounds like you've been through more than once.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
as we get older, sometimes we'll find that our diagnoses of breast cancer and other, chronic diseases will increase. And so you're right. Exactly. Well said. Those can definitely impact our sleep as well.
So we kind of already talked about sleeping pills that yes, they can have a place in therapy for short-term acute use to get you through. Be cognizant about like when that time period has passed. And then, let's talk about how sort of we help ourselves not get on that train of long-term use. So to me, this is comes in with sleep hygiene and routines. How do you see that?
Yeah. So I think there are many, many things that we need to look at. So sleep hygiene is really important. And I think probably most of your audience knows a bit about sleep hygiene, but just kind of the basics are, watching your caffeine and alcohol intake before bed, not having heavy meals before bed, not using electronics before bed, having a wind down routine, some of the really basic things about sleep. And I look at sleep hygiene as sort of like kind of brushing your teeth, right? It's a way to potentially prevent a cavity, kind of like sleep hygiene is a potential way to prevent insomnia.
Hmm.
But once you have insomnia, unfortunately, sleep hygiene isn't really going to cut it. So that's when we move into more advanced types of techniques. Really, specifically, the area that I work in is CBTI. It's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. That's
Hmm.
a really evidence-based approach to dealing with insomnia. It's been around since the 1980s. And like we kind of touched on earlier, a lot of primary care physicians aren't familiar with it and they don't know how to administer it. And there's another layer to it in that there are not many practitioners out there who are administering it. So people who administer it are usually behavioral sleep medicine folks, and they are they're scarce. They're not that many out there. So if you look at the population of people who have insomnia, which is roughly 10 to 30% of our population, there aren't enough behavioral sleep medicine specialists to go around to help all these people.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of self-help books about CBTI, and some sleep coaches are doing it. I'm doing it. I have been taking extra courses on how to do that. I'll be taking one soon by one of the doctors who is kind of a pioneer in it, to learn more.
Hmm.
So I don't want to say that all sleep coaches do CBTI, but I think all are somewhat familiar with the principles. So there are different ways to get CBTI, but I just feel like the entry point to getting CBTI is often the primary care provider, and they're just unaware or don't know who to refer to.
Okay. So
Unfortunate.
can you give us a little bit more background about what that looks like or
Sure.
what is, like as a client or a patient,
Yes.
what
So
it entails?
CBTI is a methodology that has different, sort of like different menu items, and you can choose sort of different menu items and or choose all of them. So a small part of CBTI is sleep hygiene and education, but that alone is not going to solve the issue. You have to do other things on top of it. So we're mainly looking at behavioral things to do and cognitive things to do, hence the cognitive behavioral. The behavioral things they really carry more weight for most people. They're sort of like the heavy hitters. And so the behavioral things are, there are two main ones. One is called stimulus control. And that is, I mean, these are such clinical cold terms, but essentially what they need a rebrand of these terms, in my opinion. But essentially what that is not doing anything in your bed other than sleep and intimacy. So what we see a lot of times, people who have insomnia, describes a lot of my clients, is that they wake up in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 a.m. They can't fall back asleep. Instead of just lying in bed there stewing, what I instruct them to do is to get out of bed, take themselves away from the stressful situation, because we want to ultimately unpair the bed and stress. We want the bed to be linked in their brain with sleep. So essentially we're kind of retraining their brain by having them get up out of bed and go to another room in dim light and do something pleasant and relaxing until they feel sleepy again, in which point they get back into bed and try to sleep again. So it's a very simple, it's not always easy, but it's a simple kind of direction to give people. The other thing is called sleep restriction. And it's, again, a terrible, terrible name, because people imagine themselves having less sleep when they're like, wait a minute, I'm already not getting a lot of sleep. You want me to sleep less? So that's not really what happens. So I like to call it bedtime restriction, or there's just other ways of terming it. But essentially what ends up happening with a lot of people who have insomnia is that they are spending a lot of time in bed only to produce a certain amount of hours of sleep. So for example, they could be spending 9 hours in bed only to get 6 hours of sleep. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to match their time in bed with the actual amount of time they're producing sleep. So it's sometimes we are having them stay up much later to really kind of boost their sleep drive, to get that sleep drive really, really solid. Because what we find is that a lot of times people who have insomnia will go to bed extra early to try to catch more sleep, and it ends up backfiring on them. And what we also want to do is we want to really look at their wake time. We want to keep that wake time really consistent day in and day out, even on the weekends. And this goes for everybody, just to have a
WAIT, wait.
Wake.
Like wait, awake.
Wake. Yes, sorry. Yes.
WAKE. Okay.
Yes.
Wake time. Okay.
Wake. Yeah.
Like,
so
wait.
we really want to, regardless of if you have insomnia, it's really important to keep your wake time consistent, because when your wake time is consistent, it's really going to strengthen your circadian rhythm. So those are sort of the behavioral components of CBTI. The cognitive components really are about cognitive restructuring. So, for example, somebody might have this cognitive distortion that I must get 8 hours of sleep or I'm going to get sick. So what we really try to do is try to not make it a Pollyanna situation where they're just like flipping the script to make it all sunshine and roses, but we're really trying to help them see sleep in a more realistic way. So for example, someone might say to me, you know, I had a really rough night of sleep and I'm probably going to get fired at work today. Right. So that's a really catastrophizing statement. So what we do is we help kind of modify the statements to be more realistic. We're not saying to them, okay, just tell yourself you're going to have an awesome day and everything is going to be peachy keen. But we really want to be more realistic and say, okay, I might not perform at my maximum today. I might not like knock it out of the park, but I'm not going to get fired. Because if they think back on their history to all the other nights they haven't slept well, they've actually performed pretty decently the next day. But they're just in the moment, they're just sort of kind of like their brain is just not thinking in a way that's super rational about it. So there's a lot of, thought work and restructuring thoughts that goes into it. It's a process that, you're essentially retraining your brain, and that can take a while. That can take,
right.
a month, 2 months, 3 months. It depends on the person and how receptive they are and how long they've had insomnia, lots of different factors. But it's a pretty robust type of way to deal with insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Oh, I like it.
pretty evidence backed.
Yeah. So what is more important, quality or quantity when it comes to sleep?
They're both important, but I would say the quality rules out over quantity. So I would rather see somebody get 6.5 hours of really good quality sleep than 8 hours of broken sleep that wasn't refreshing.
And what do we consider quality? Do we need to know exactly how long we spent in deep sleep versus REM or whatever? Or
Yeah,
is it
good.
just about like feel waking up rested?
Yeah, so there are a few different variables in there. I think the main one that we want to focus in on is how do we feel in the morning? Do we wake up feeling relatively refreshed? Are we able to go throughout our day without relying on massive caffeine hits? We're also
Mm-hmm.
looking at things sleep related. We're looking at like sleep efficiency, like how much of the night are they actually spending asleep? That's a sleep efficiency percentage. We're looking at how long it takes them to get to sleep. So if you're frequently taking longer than a half an hour to get to sleep, that can be an issue, and that can cut down on your quality. Also, wake ups. If you're having multiple wake ups and you can't get back to sleep, that's impacting your quality. So there's a few different quality measures, but what I really like to help my clients understand is how you feel and the next day is a better barometer of your quality than saying, you touched on earlier, REM scores and deep scores. Like, this is where the sleep trackers can kind of be a blessing and a curse. It gives us some good data, but for people who have insomnia and they only see 10% deep sleep, they're like, oh my gosh, that's really terrible. So we have to kind
Yeah.
of remember, if we're looking at a sleep tracker, that the deep and the REM phases are not always accurate. They're about 50% accurate. So we don't want to get too bogged down in those numbers. They're just kind of
Okay.
we just kind of want to use them as a general guide.
Yeah. Is it true that women have more sleep issues than men?
Yes. So according to different studies and different surveys, women are probably about 2 times more likely to have insomnia for some of the
Oh.
reasons we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There was a recent poll in 2021 saying that women were 1.5 times more likely to report that they woke up rarely or never feeling rested. So the statistics show that women are struggling with sleep more. But I do want to throw a little caveat. I heard a sleep doctor say this recently, and there's some merit to it. And that is that men typically don't disclose these kinds of things as readily as women. There's still sort of that kind of masculine toughen up, ideology with some men, that they're not going to admit to having problems like this. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's, if men were to say to really share that they were having sleep problems, maybe we would see a more equal ratio. But from what we know now, just from the surveys that are done, women are definitely struggling more with sleep for sure.
Mm. Interesting. So, what are there specific routines that you recommend, both in the morning and the evening, to help optimize sleep?
Well, I really strongly believe in the value of morning and evening routines. And I do have a free mini course that people can take on my website that goes in depth with this. But
Okay, cool.
sort of what my take on it is that morning routines. So let me back up and say that there's a lot of um, sort of emphasis on the 5 a.m. club. I see this a lot. Like, people are like, be in the 5 a.m. club and get to the gym at 5 o'clock. And they've got this full like litany of things they're doing at 5 o'clock a.m.
Oh,
And it's not necessarily like, when I talk about having a morning routine, I'm not necessarily talking about early morning routine. So I think that
just whenever you wake up.
yeah, just whenever you wake up.
Yeah.
I feel like it's really important to have, a couple things kind of lined up. So one of them is really the strongest thing is getting natural daylight exposure, natural sunlight exposure as soon as possible after you wake up. And without your sunglasses. When I walk
Mm,
my dogs in the morning, around 7 a.m., I see a lot of people in the neighborhood with their sunglasses on, walking their dogs. And the reason why we don't want to wear sunglasses is because when the natural sunlight, the natural daylight hits our retina, it sends this signal to our suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our circadian pacemaker. And when that happens, there's this beautiful cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters that happen. So any residual melatonin from the night before gets shut down. It increases our dopamine, our serotonin,
mhm.
our cortisol for energy, and it also kind of prepares our melatonin production for the upcoming night. So we're getting a lot of really robust benefits from just 10 minutes of sunlight exposure in the morning. And you're not having to look directly in the sun. You just don't want to have your eyes covered with the
Mhm.
sunglasses. So that's really the key kind of cornerstone of a morning routine, is just prioritizing that natural light. I think the other thing to really consider is to have some kind of intentional practice or intentionality to your morning, to kind of ground yourself. My little mini course goes through this, and ideas to do it. But the whole premise is that, how you start your day is how you live your day. That's a quote by Louise Hay. And I really take that to heart, because if our days start off in a very chaotic manner, that can really spill over into the day and spill over to the night, which then impacts your ability to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So whatever sort of grounding, intentional practice you can, that feels good for you, that's aligned to you, is something that I think that everyone can do. And I respect the fact that, a lot of people out there listening have jobs and kids and responsibilities that they have to manage in the morning. But even if you just have 5 or 10 minutes, take that time for
Yeah.
yourself to get grounded and centered before you start the daily grind, right?
Yeah, I think, women have this tendency to overgive and to be
Yes.
completely checked out of our bodies, our lives, our thoughts, our feelings, all the things. And I think it starts, like you said, as soon as you wake up and you're immediately running. I'm running to go get my kids up, or I'm running to, like make my coffee and get out the door without stopping and saying, how do I want to feel today?
Yes.
What do I want my day to look like? How do I want to show up today?
Yes.
And just those little questions, that's enough to ground you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start
Mm-hmm.
asking yourself that, it's like you can't ask those questions and not check in and go inside at least a little bit. And when you set um, that precedent, or for the day, then you're more likely, when maybe you get triggered in the middle of your day, you're more likely to say, oh wait, hey wait, when I started today, I wanted to feel this way, or I wanted to show up in this way. And just because I'm triggered now doesn't mean I need or have to react.
Yes.
I can do something different, show up, think something different. So it again, it seems small and maybe oversimplified, but it can be so powerful. So I would say those extra 5 to 10 minutes are totally worth it. Wake up just a little bit earlier before anyone else is awake, even to give yourself that quiet time
Yes.
to check in and
Yes.
make those decisions for you get to
Yes.
decide. I think we forget that. We get to decide. So many of the
Yes.
times I think we say, "Oh, I have to do this and I have to do that." Well, actually, we're choosing. We
Mm-hmm.
get ourselves in the situation where we might have to, but that still links back to a choice that we made.
Exactly.
So, I think
Yeah.
it brings the power back to
Yeah.
us.
I so well said. I had a client recently who, we were going over her morning routine, and basically she had really no morning routine. She would get up out of bed, she would immediately get dressed. She might grab a cup of coffee on the way out to the door. By the time from waking up to, it took her about, probably, she was at work within 30 minutes. I mean, there was literally no time for, she did, I don't want to say there was no time. She did not make time. So when
Right.
we were working together, we actually designed a really intentional morning routine for her. And it made such a difference for her and the way that she handled stressors at work and how
Hmm.
those stressors spilled out into the evening and would, disrupt her sleep if she was
Yeah.
having that stressful day. So it just, I mean, I've seen it time and again play out in real life in practice, the
Yeah.
value of just that intentionality. And everybody is so individual. So what might work for you might not really jibe for me. So we all have to kind of design our own and kind of come up with what works for us.
Yeah. For me, I'm a morning meditator and morning movement person.
Mm,
So, and I say movement because it could be a workout or it could be yoga or it could be a dog walk, but so it could be inside or outside. My workout movement space inside is in my sunroom, so I still get light in there even though it's coming through a window, but I started this routine for myself when I was working graveyards.
oh,
And I mean, we can talk a little bit about shift work and how, that wreaks havoc on your body and your sleep cycle and all those things. But I found that if I woke up and I did those two things at minimum, even if I didn't make time to have food, I could do that on the run, but at least those two things would help prepare me for the rest of the day. Well, then I shift over to working a 7 a.m. shift, which I had never in my life ever considered or called myself a morning person. But in order to make it to work on time, I live an hour away, so you have to wake up but I also found that if I didn't at the beginning, when you're like making a big shift like that, sometimes your routines don't necessarily fall immediately in line. So
right.
some days I would do my things and some days I wouldn't. And I found that the days I wouldn't, my mood and how I showed up was completely off. And so I'm
Yes.
like, okay, these are priorities. I need to go back to doing these. These are non-negotiables. And that's what, people are like, how do you wake up at 4:30 or 5? And I say, because I have my non-negotiables, I have to meditate, I have to move. And ideally, I'd like to have space in my day to get all my things ready without hecticness and like that high stress level so early in the morning. Most of us have a job that is stressful enough. We don't need to add that extra stress to ourselves and we are doing it without realizing it, I think. And so, also by implementing these routines and this regularity, we can be more aware and cognizant of the extra stress that we're putting on ourselves. That then maybe once we're aware, we can choose to not do that.
Yes. So well said. So well said. Yeah, that consistency is so key. And I can really relate to what you said about if my morning routine gets disrupted for some weird circumstance and I'm not able to do a certain portion of that routine, and that's usually movement or sunlight, I don't feel right. I don't feel centered the rest of the day. And I just feel off. It just
Yeah.
it really impacts me. So I'm very protective of that morning time, very protective.
Yeah. Um, and I think I'm not a parent, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that even if our kids see us having these routines and being very intentional with our self-care time and our self-care boundaries, then I think I would like to think that hopefully that would rub off on them and that could even be like, some really positive trickle down
Yeah.
instead of like, I'm a child of the 80s and, my, I'm a product of what I was raised by, so I saw my parents, rushing around in the morning, quick, quick, hurry up, eat, we got to get out the door, all the things. And so it took me, years before I realized, wait, I don't have to do that. And I actually enjoy my mornings when I'm not in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a parent either, but my intuition tells me that if we are modeling those very intentional behaviors, it will rub off on children eventually, and they'll see that we can kind of take our time if we need to in the morning and just
Yeah.
be more intentional.
Yeah. Yes. Enjoy ourselves, no matter what
Yes.
time of day it is.
Yes.
So, you mentioned the course on your
Yes.
website. Can you tell us
Yes.
about that? And then any other thing, like where to find you and all those good things?
Yeah. So this mini course is really designed as sort of like the first step to help people with their sleep, because I'm such a believer in the power of those anchors of the morning and the evening routine. And it's a very it's a short course that people can take and just get some pretty pretty practical suggestions to implement to get started on a routine. It gives them a lot of ideas and strategies on how to get better sleep through these routines. So I've got that, and I also offer to anyone who's interested and is struggling with sleep something called a sleep clarity call, which is when you and I chat on Zoom or a call, and you share some of your sleep struggles, and I share with you back some potential ways that you could mitigate those struggles, maybe talk about root cause, why they're happening, and a couple of strategies to get back on track. So I love to talk to people about their sleep. So don't be shy if you want to chat with me. That maybe you could share that link. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And then on the socials?
Social media, yes, very active on Instagram, doing reels and stories on the regular. So my handle there is morganadams.wellness. Feel free to DM me and say hello. Yeah, those are the places where I'm most active. I'm kind of active on LinkedIn. I'm Morgan Adams on LinkedIn.
All right.
And yeah, those are the places to find me and chat about sleep. And I'll share some resources on these channels that hopefully are, going to help you get better sleep and, be healthier overall.
Excellent. Well, anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to bring forward before we finish up?
I think we've covered a lot, but I think what I'd like to just sort of say in closing is that there are so many things we can do to help our sleep that are free and simple. And
Hmm.
so I really suggest that people start with the basics, the foundationals, the free things before they do the biohacks, because like the biohacks are sexy, they're interesting, they're unique, but if we don't have those basics dialed in first, the biohacks are kind of a waste of our time and money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
No, yeah, I tell my patients the same thing. Even when it comes to testing, in functional medicine, you can do, oh my gosh, so many of these, crazy tests that can really show you very unique things about your body and your biology. But is it always necessary? Is it going to change what we're doing? So let's set a good foundation first. Yeah, I love that you said that. Like, start with the basics, start with your foundation, start with your routines, all that good stuff. And then if we're still having challenges, then we can go do like maybe the more complicated or like you said, biohacking things.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes more expensive. Like if, like that's some usually when we get into like oh, okay, this is where we're going to spend money now.
Right. And be selective,
Yeah.
there's no shame in, I mean, I personally have a cooling mattress pad. It is the best money I've spent on my sleep. And I've done,
Mm,
but I have
mm,
done all the other foundational basic things first. And this
yeah.
was just an add-on because I'm in perimenopause and I sleep hot sometimes. So it's worth the money.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna say something, and then you could wag your finger at me, but I let my dog sleep in the bed with me.
Me too. No shame.
Well, and I love
No
them. I'm
shame.
not, like I said, I'm not a human mom, but I am a four-legged animal mom.
Yes.
But they are little heaters, and I'm a warm
Yes.
person too. So I bought a sleep or not a cooling blanket,
Uh-huh.
but I don't really know. Maybe I should go with the cooling pad because maybe that would like help more. Because
Definitely it's an upgrade. It's an upgrade for
I
sure.
love that you brought that up. Yeah. So also don't be afraid to like, yeah, do some whatever, you need to do to make your sleep space, like that, like you said, like associating the bed with sleep only. But also like if your room is too bright, how much other light is coming in? Do you have too much blue light? Or, like do you need blackout curtains? Is the room too hot in general? Do you maybe need a fan to like, quiet down any background noise that could come through and wake you up? There's a lot of things that you can do to like, I call it my sleep cave. I call my bedroom my sleep
Yes,
cave.
that's exact. And Lara, that's exactly what we want our bedrooms to be like. We want them to be like a cave, cool, dark, and quiet. So I think what you're saying is really important. Do a bedroom audit.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
a short way of saying it, is just take stock in what's going on around you and your bedroom surroundings. You may find things that are not in alignment, and you may have to make some adjustments. And some of them are really pretty easy to make, by the way.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Morgan. I appreciate your expertise and all the work that you're doing. It was really fascinating to hear more about the cognitive behavioral therapy aspect of this. So that's definitely something that I think hopefully will pique some curiosity and people can look more into that and see if it's right for them. I'm going to post all of your website and social stuff on the show notes page, which is on my website, drlaramay.com/podcast. That's where all these episodes and show notes live. So definitely reach out to Morgan. Take advantage of that 20-minute, it was a sleep clarity call, is
That's
what you
exactly
call it?
right. Yep.
Sleep clarity call. Because even if you two decide that you're not, copacetic to work together, like I'm sure you'll still get some benefit out of that and things that you can implement and to move forward and try out. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And yeah, well, as your research and practice grows, like I'm happy to have you back to keep talking about this because I'm sure just like with so many other things, we keep learning. We're like more and more and more, we're starting to uncover more of the behavioral side, the cognitive side, the biological side. So that's why I do this is to bring this information forward as the research and the practices are improving.
Yeah. Thank you for all you do, Lara. It's wonderful.